Welcome to the Geoeconomics Podcast. I'm your host, Aleksa Burmazovic, and today I'm speaking with Ekaterina Evdokimova. Ekaterina is the co-founder and the managing partner at Stupino Quadrat, which is Russia's first private special economic zone. She's also a lawyer in several jurisdictions and actually works with FEMOZA, the International Free Zones and Special Economic Zones organization. The discussion we have today is going to be focused on how Russia leveraged its legacy of science and industry in the SEZ space. We sort of talk about the Russian SEZ space and the business environment and what makes it special and unique. So anybody interested in Russia and the ex-Soviet space, because a lot of this stuff carries over, this might be the discussion for you. So without further ado, here's Ekaterina. And here I am with Ekaterina. Ekaterina, how are you doing today?
Hello, Alexa. I'm fine. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for coming on to the podcast. Ekaterina, if I'm not mistaken, Stupino Quadrat, your zone has just recently, I think a couple of, maybe a week ago, has turned 6 years old.
That's right. That's right. And it is the first private special economic zone in Russia.
So it's 6 years since the first private special economic zone in Russia has been around. But how long have SEZs been in Russia, from the public sector, so to speak?
Since 2005, there is a law on special economic zones. And the first tries, they started at the end of the 20th century with special economic zones in Kaliningrad, in Murmansk, and in Magadan.
And were these zones during the Soviet times, or was this in the 90s?
No, it was all on the end of 90s. So the special economic zones as an institution is a creation of the 21st century for Russia.
Oh, it's definitely so. I'm thinking about the 20th century. In the Soviet Union, sort of, there were, on one end we have China that experimented with special economic zones in the 1980s during their own communist period, and in Russia the transition sort of happened during the 90s. So when looking at the Soviet Union, up to the 90s, I'm sure that there was significant levels of academic and scientific innovation that was going on, and this is stuff that happened in like concentrated development centers throughout the country. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about that and maybe what the legacy is of these centers and how they influence modern SEZs throughout Russia.
In my view, it is a problem of separation in the population into academics and non-academic. And if such people meet together, they don't have common ground to speak about. So in Russia, the way of educating people, and it is continued up to now, educating people on the same level until they are 15 years old, which means mathematics, foreign languages, literature, history, of the same base is very important. And also the school program was a matter of the federal regulation. And in Germany, for example, it's a matter of federal state regulation. So different federal states have different academic standards. You want me to be more precise? I will try to do so. Just to explain the general academical educational system in Russia. And then after the 8th grade, people have to decide whether they go to the university or whether they stay in a profession. And 80 to 90% of people stayed for another 2 years at school in order to be able to go to the university. This percentage is quite different in the United States and in Germany from those countries which I know from my own experience. So this means that the academical tradition is quite different in the perception of the huge mass of the population. Then universities. There were several universities in several federal states of the Russian Federation with a very good tradition. And there were 14 scientific centers, also federal scientific centers, which is not an educational institution, but an institution for research and development. In the traditionally strong areas of the Russian competence: physics, material science, chemistry, biology, medical science, different sources of energy, including atomic energy. And those 14 scientific centers, they are developing further. In Novosibirsk, which is one of the greenfield university built up in the 60s of the last century, there is a very strong and very productive academic city. It's the name academic city, and it has become a technopark right now. So what they are doing, they are welcoming all the startups through sharing facilities for prototypes, 3D printers, all that stuff which you need in order to make a prototype. And which is more important, with the very strong mentoring network. So Novosibirsk is really advanced. Then we have 8 of these 14 scientific centers located in Moscow and Moscow region, in the big Moscow area. And there are also success stories about how these scientific centers converts into serial production. Dubna, for example, a special economic zone, is located in one of these scientific centers. I guess what is lacking in Russia right now, and I see a huge opportunity for the foreign investors, for the foreign angels, is a private venture capitalists, private venture capital culture. So from my experience, what I see in the Silicon Valley, or also in Hong Kong, there are worlds between what Russian startups do have to their disposal and what is just normal style of life in China or in the USA. Also in Germany, they started a very good startup support program. Russia supports at the moment very, very generous the industry. So the measures of state support are unprecedented right now in Russia. We get up to 30% reimbursement of the capex in certain industries. There are very low-cost loans for different kinds of industries. There is subvention for infrastructure and renovation of the producing facilities. So compared with what I know in the Western world.
So what types of industries usually get supported? Is it stuff like software, or is it materials science and propulsion? You mentioned there being a tradition of hard science like biochemistry and physics and all of that stuff in Russia. I was wondering, are these industries getting promoted as hard industries, or are they searching to diversify with stuff like software and with advanced technologies a bit more in the software space?
So there are 4 types of special economic zones in Russia. Industrial zones for producing industry, for serial production. High-tech zones, this is more what you're speaking about, promotion of innovations. Then port zones and tourism zone. But the industrial production is being promoted by different means of federal support and by different institutions on the federal level and also on the regional level. So for the industrial production, there are special economic zones of the industrial type. There are industrial parks. There are territories of accelerated development. There are monocities, where only one plant is granting jobs for all the population of the city. And they make 6% of the Russian GDP. Okay, so these are examples of the industrial measures of support and institutes promoting industry. For the scientific and innovative development, there are special economic zones of the high-tech type, and there are tradition of these scientific cities, which were at the Soviet time financed by the state and it was a collection of beautiful mines. There were 14 of them, and this tradition is continuing to be so. But the problem is that these scientists, they are not entrepreneurs in the majority of cases. And to bring innovation on scale, you need to have entrepreneurial mind. And this bridge between the science and entrepreneurship, this is what we still have to work on. Different institutions like Academ City in Novosibirsk or Skolkovo in Moscow, they are making their full effort, and they succeed. But there is much more innovation or much more scientific work and scientific achievements which could be commercialized and are still underestimated. And this is why I was speaking about need for venture capitalists with their scaled experiences. We lack of serial entrepreneurs. We lack of mentoring tradition on scale. Like, in the Silicon Valley, you have Peter Diamandis, who is educating all the startups with his 3 or 5 different educational programs, starting with Singularity University and up to his different mentoring programs, where he gathers the best teachers and the best trainers and the best coaches, and also the angel investors.
With the different types of zones taking place in Russia, Stupino Quadrat is which type of zone?
Stupino Quadrat is originally as industrial zone. So it was founded as an industrial zone. The specialty is that Stupino Quadrat is a completely privately owned land. And as a private investor, we applied to the government to grant benefits in taxes and customs to our residents.
Mm-hmm.
And then the government agreed for this experiment. And within 6 years, we attracted 30 investors. 17 plants are already operating. We created 2,500 direct direct jobs, and with the coefficient for indirect jobs, you know that it is 3 to 15 depending on the country. We have about 7 coefficient of 7 for indirect jobs, so we are by more than 15,000 jobs right now, indirect jobs.
It's interesting that the first private zone in Russia was industrial as opposed to high tech, because with high tech there's a bit lower startup costs. You can have sort of experimental laboratories that don't necessarily cost that much, whereas the installation of industrial facilities is something that would presumably take a lot more capital, something that's associated with government supported zones as opposed to private. So are there plans for other private zones in Russia, particularly in the high tech space, or what's the route that you see the Russian zone space taking?
It is a political moment we're speaking about now. You can imagine that since 2014, we have 2 problems. The first one is we are isolated because of the sanctions, and the other one is the volatility of the ruble. So the imports, and Russia lived for the consumer market, but not only for the consumer market. I don't want to be that political, so I will speak about consumer market. Lived from import. Everything for day-to-day life we imported from abroad. And now the market is empty, so we need everything. We need food, we need cosmetics, we need construction materials, and so on. So Russia started, and the private entrepreneurs started to build up production facilities. The demand is huge for that. I can tell you, my special economic zone is more international because we have an international managing team, and we were from the very beginning oriented to attract foreign investors. Since I'm a German lawyer and a Russian lawyer, American LLM, so I operated in different jurisdictions, and I live in Germany. Well, I've been living in Germany since 1997.
So, what type of challenges do you usually see faced by the foreign investors into Russia? I'm sure it's an unusual market for them. What is it that Stupino Quadrat usually helps out with? What seem to be the most common challenges that they run into?
The concept of Stupino Quadrat is a holistic industrial approach, as I called it, making investments happen by making investors happy. So what we do, we give the investor an opportunity to concentrate on his key competition, production and sales. The rest we can take over for him if he wants. If not, then he's doing it itself. We save the effort of the management of the foreign investors, that we can help and assist in any day-to-day difficulties, starting with getting work permission or English-speaking driver, or find a school for a child, an international school, or a residence for the general manager, who is very often a foreign citizen, up to constructing the whole plant completely and give a turnkey solution. So depending on what demand they have, we can assist in everything. And this was the main mission of Stupino Quadrat, which was also translated to the world with our different representative offices in the world, and also through the communication on conferences such as BNU, for example, now. Why it was not a high-tech zone, not a scientific innovation zone? Well, the innovation activities are allowed and also appreciated in our industrial zone. We can host the innovations, and we are working with different institutions on it. There is a concept created by Mr. Aganbegyan, who is one of the oldest members of the Russian Academy of Science, to create a net university in Stupino Quadrat, making a network of the 8 scientific centers in the big Moscow area, creating a campus for bachelors for the first 2 bachelor years in Stupino Quadrat, and giving lectures by the well-known and world-famous professors from these 8 scientific centers, and then to make campuses by the scientific centers for the students chosen by those professors for the further education, for their masters, for their PhDs, and also a business school, a medical school, and a language school within Stupino Quadrat. This would enable, on the one hand side, the close connection of the industry and entrepreneurship with the scientific leaders. This is what I spoke about, the gap, the lacking of commercial set of mind by the most of scientists, on the one hand side. On the other hand side, this would give this university their reputation established since the Soviet time for many decades, because teachers in this university would be the professors and members of the Academy of Science from 8 scientific centers.
And with these scientific centers being one of the research and development pillars of Russia today, what are sort of the largest, well, except for Novosibirsk, which you mentioned, what are the biggest legacy centers of this type in Russia, and what are some interesting developments that have been coming out of these places? Because one of the stories that I remember was that Yandex, the sort of technology company, was experimenting with self-driving cars in one of the modern high-tech zones in Russia. So I was just wondering which the biggest zones are as far as technological innovation goes, and what are some of the more interesting innovations that we may see coming from these places?
Well, there is a huge innovation center in Moscow, Technopolis Moscow, which is located also in very close to one of the former Soviet scientific centers, Zelenograd, and they were leaders in microelectronics, but they are still developing electronics and exporting it outside of the country. They have a strong biotech expertise right now, and several high-tech biotech enterprises are operating there. They have a good means of support for startups because they build up sharing production facilities for both for prototype and also for the serial production. Very service-oriented. Technopolis is good in, a new management team arrived a year and a half ago. And now the leader of Technopolis is Mr. Dyoktyev, Gennady Dyoktyev. I can arrange for an interview with him. He's really very open-minded and service, his mindset as a service provider for business, which is not that usual for the state-owned special economic zones. And they are a high-tech special economic zone.
That would be a great conversation to have. I mean, it's really interesting to figure out, a lot of the SEZs that we speak to end up being stuff like, business process outsourcing and logistics and just these centers of implementing existing technologies and sort of spreading the existing technologies and development to regions that are underdeveloped, and that's perfectly fine. But what I'm really excited about hearing was new technologies and new approaches coming from these places, and a lot of this stuff has been coming from Russia, China, and the US. But something that I would be really excited to see would be more innovations and more of this new technology type zones happening in the global south. So for example, Brazil has recently created legislation that allows for export processing zones, and I'd love to see places like that, or India, South Africa, and places like that innovating and creating these new and high technology zones. So from your point of view, Ekaterina, looking at sort of the four types of zones that are present in Russia, you mentioned tourist, port zones, and then industrial and high tech. Which of these do you think are the most relevant currently for emerging markets? Because if we're looking at an extremely underdeveloped region, let's say Somalia, then port zones like the Freeport of Berbera that DP World is developing out there, I think makes the most sense. But how would you sort of grade in which order these need to be developed? Maybe it's the port goes first and the high tech goes last. How would you sort of approach this?
It's an interesting question. Thank you for that, Aleksa. You know that in the I guess it was 1976, as UNCTAD started a program for export processing zones. And for the developing countries, at that moment, it was the number one solution because they created over 1.2 million jobs within 2 years. The idea was that the world famous concerns come to a territory equipped with the industrial infrastructure financed by the World Bank. And they use the local labor force, but 100% of the production went for export. This was a very good idea for developing countries. But nowadays we are living in quite a different time. I guess a lot of processes will be completely a revolutionary research in the next decade. The classical industries and the classical industry leaders are disrupting and have to be rethought from the very beginning in order to stay on the market. I'm sure that in the next decades, we will have a development of a digital product development so that the most famous or the leaders in the industry will be doing their product as a digital model and sending it to all over the world for the local production on the shared production facilities. This, in my view, this is the future. These production facilities have to be equipped with the top machinery and have to be operated by AI, adjusting the production processes to the daylight, to the price of the electricity, and also to products from very small to huge amounts. And I guess pandemic was a catalysator for these processes. We saw that all the value chains were disrupted. The logistics collapsed. So the need for the local production in each country is huge. And I guess that we are going in the direction of diversing or to splitting the product development process, which will remain by the industry leaders on the one hand side, and to production processing capacity and expertise, which has to be new established in the industrial world. And this would be Industry 5.0. We see this contract manufacturing trend in pharma a lot right now. There is Pfizer One, for example, and many other companies who concentrate on contractual production for different pharmaceutical concerns all over the world. And according to our analysis, the contract manufacturing is used for the most parts of the industry, from textile, furniture, chemistry to metal production and electronics. We see the contract manufacturing, the best example of the contract manufacturing is the Taiwan and Chinese company,
Foxconn.
What is the name? Yeah, exactly.
So these are like the original parts manufacturers that work for bigger companies, like Foxconn manufactures parts for Apple and for Android, right?
They are manufacturing, according to my knowledge, also the complete iPhones or televisions. They are manufacturing up to 70% of the electronics, as far as I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to think about how there's layers to any given industry that's present in SEZs. Like, for example, one of the things that I noted was that original parts manufacturers for automobiles specifically, because that's something that I was looking at recently, they set up shop in SEZs and they do manufacturing. And this is a company that's, let's say, this is a Kyrgyz company that I was looking at, but they build parts. There's many hundreds of companies that actually make up the supply chain of larger manufacturers, larger companies, Foxconn with Apple, and I'm sure Foxconn subcontracts to other manufacturers that need to make stuff like circuit boards or whatever parts. That's a fascinating way to think about vertical integration of these industries. So with regard to something like that, in your experience in the industrial zones in Russia, are a lot of these Russian companies vertically integrated where they produce their own entire chain of products from start to finish, or is there a lot of these, if I can make a joke, sort of like the Russian nesting dolls? Is there a chain of companies that interact vertically through a single value chain?
Russian industrial tradition was established in the Soviet Union, where we had value chains distributed in the 15 Soviet republics. And a very strong cooperation was between Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia had to reestablish these value chains. And many of the plants were vertical integrated. And this was not the best idea, in my view.
So why wouldn't it be a good idea?
To be vertical integrated?
Yes.
Because of the specialization. I guess this vertical integration brings, at least at the beginning, when the traditional value chains collapse, to losses in quality. What I see right now in our special economic zone, we have mostly the consumer goods. We have only two producers, for example, Phoenix Contact. They are doing over, it's a German producer of electronics and electrical parts for the industry. They have over 50,000 products. And they are suppliers for Siemens, for General Electric, and for Schneider Electric, for example. And this is a question of specialization. Let's see how the modern world develops, because I give you right after the COVID story, the chains have to be rethought and reorganized. Maybe it comes to vertical integration. Maybe it comes to separation of the production activities and concentration on the product development. And then the different producers would have an engineering teams combining the products all over the world in a digital form, and then sending the end digital product to the contract manufacturer. This might be the future.
I almost completely and perfectly agree with that. I've been looking at two different modes of production and seeing sort of what the contrast is between vertical integration versus not. And the two examples that I've taken is World War II era production, which was extremely vertically integrated, and particularly in the Soviet Union for the production of battle vehicles, compared to, say, the production of Formula One vehicles for high performance racing. And in high performance racing, there is a central engineering team that figures all of this stuff out, but they subcontract a lot of their works and components manufacturer and all of that. And it's all extremely expensive stuff to make, but it's non-vertically integrated compared to, mass production that exists in sort of this military setting, where it made sense to have vertical integration because you're trying to win on sort of economies of scale and bulk production. So it's really fascinating to think about how the history of various places throughout the 20th century influenced the way that the companies exist now. And you mentioned propensity for some companies to be vertically integrated in Russia, and how there's a trend to when you're competing internationally, there is a trend towards de-integration, vertically speaking. So all of these seem like extremely exciting developments for SEZs, because when you allow for specialization, like you mentioned, when you're creating stuff like circuit boards or something like that, then the people working there have much more time to study that specific problem, as opposed to product and project management. There's a lot of time and effort lost there. And when you specialize, you're able to much more closely analyze the thing that you're manufacturing and figure out some steps in how to increase efficiency and just generally provide more value with the technology that you're creating. So this was a really fascinating conversation for me. I didn't speak much during it because I was busy listening. But as far as understanding more about these things like vertical integration and doing business in Russia and the SEZs that are going on in Russia, there's a book that I would recommend. It's called Innovation in Industrial Clusters, and we'll have a link to that in the description. But I was wondering, Ekaterina, if there are any books, films, or websites, blogs, any type of material that you'd like to recommend to our listeners as far as finding some sources about all of this stuff.
Thank you for interesting conversation. And for Technopolis Moscow, we are working currently on, flatly speaking, the assignment is to create best ever special economic zone in the world on the basis of Technopolis. And I'm very excited because we are working in a team of advanced consultants in the world of the special economic zones, starting with the president of FEMOZA and up to Andreas Baumgartner, who is the Dubai International Financial Center.
Andreas was on our podcast from the Metis Institute.
Yes. So I'm really honored and extremely glad to have a privilege to work in such a team. And we are elaborating now solutions which have never been, and also Titus Gable, you know him, 3 private cities. So we'll
Certainly.
see what of the proposals we'll be able to implement in Technopolis. I'm excited about this work, and I would keep you posted on it.
I mean, best special economic zone in the world is a very, very competitive superlative to capture. I wish you all the luck in succeeding on that, and I'm looking forward to anything that you can send me after this podcast. But this is a really enjoyable conversation, Ekaterina. Welcome back onto the podcast anytime. And just for our listeners, I want to thank you for listening to this conversation. You've been listening to the Geoeconomics Podcast. If you want to, you can subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on wherever you get your podcast, like Stitcher or iTunes or various other channels on the internet. You can also find us on Twitter at Geoeconomics Pod, and you can find our website, adrianoplegroup.com. All of this will be in the description. Ekaterina, I want to thank you again for coming onto the podcast, and we'll see you next time.